Hello everyone, it is Caitlin, and today I'm going to teach you to make Victorian petticoats. Let's make some petticoats. So, I have here some plain white cotton. This is what you're going to want for petticoats. This is just plain stuff. I think I got for like $2 a yard at Walmart. This stuff is not great quality, but it's going to do you if you're just starting out or something. If you're wanting something that's really good, I would suggest Petticoat cotton, which you can buy from Dharma Trading. It's a little bit more expensive, about $5 or $6 a yard, but it's really nice and it'll last you ages. So if you're only doing this every once in a while, these will probably last you a while. But if you're going out and dressing out all the time, I would suggest more Petticoat cotton because it's going to last you a whole lot longer. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to need to do is figure out how long we want our petticoat. So if you're making one that is underneath your skirt support, so like your skirt support being a hoop or a quarter petty, if you're doing pre-hoop eras, if you're wearing a quarter petticoat, you're going to want that one about mid-calf. So get your corset on, find your waist, have someone else measure you from your waist to your mid-calf, and that's going to be your finished petticoat measurement. If you're doing one for over your skirt support, you're going to want it a little bit longer. You want it longer than your skirt support. So for my purposes today, so the first plain one is going to be the one that goes right over my corded petticoat. We're doing early 1850s petticoats. Petticoats are the same throughout most of the era. Really pre-1850, you'll see a lot of them being hand sewn. But as the sewing machine starts coming out, you'll see a lot more than being machine sewn. So that's personal preference on that. I personally, because of who I portray, and I know they got a sewing machine in 1847, I hand sew everything pre-1847 and machine sew everything post. But that's personal preference. I know in Texas, sewing machines started being advertised in 1845. So I would say if you're in Texas, 1845 and post, machine sewing is okay. But that's personal preference. We're not going to get into that. So we're going to go ahead and figure out how long we need to make our panels. So petticoats are really easy because they are just rectangles. Petticoats are just rectangles, so it makes it easy. So all we have to do, we don't have to cut anything. We're going to rip everything today. So if you get a decent quality cotton, you'll be able to rip an edge instead of cutting it, which will make sure that your rectangles are straight, which is really nice and it's a lot quicker than cutting. So if you have cotton, take the very edge. I want you to rip it and see if it rips straight. And if it looks straight, then we're good. If yours does not rip straight, say it was like woven off, then you will need to cut it instead. But I got one that we can rip, and it's going to make it a lot easier. So let's figure out how long we want our petticoats. For over my corded petticoat, I want this first one to be 34 inches long when it's finished. So I need to add ½ inch at the top for a seam allowance, and I need to add a hem. I want a fairly deep hem, let's say around 2 inches, and a turnover of a ½ inch. So when I add the ½ inch here and the 2½ inches over the hem, that's 3 inches. So I need to cut mine, since I want my finished petticoat length to be 34 inches, I need to cut mine 37. So that's ½ inch at the top, ½ inch turnover at the hem, and then a 2-inch hem. 37 inches. You may choose to do a wider hem or a slightly narrower hem. You may choose to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's all on you, and you can do whatever you want with that. Just make sure you have that planned in. If you want a 34-inch petticoat, don't cut your fabric 34 inches. You're going to need more than that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move this so y'all can see it a little bit. I have my cutting table, and I'm going to lay this on the edge. There's my 34. I'll go a little bit further, 35, 36, there's my 37 mark. And I'm going to just cut a little bit. Okay. Take the 2 ends, rip. And keep going. Now, how many panels you rip is going to be dependent on how wide you want your finished petticoat circumference and also how wide your fabric is. So you definitely want something that's more than 90 inches because 90 inches is a little skimpy. You want to make sure you can actually walk in the thing. And you want something less than like I'd say 150 being the top, 150, 180 being the top range. You don't want it too terribly full either. So for this petticoat, because I have my under petticoat, I have my corded petticoat, and this is my third layer, I'm going to cut 3 panels of 45-inch fabric. You have to take in a seam allowance, it's going to be 44 inches when it's finished. So this is going to be on the 120-ish range. I have found looking at originals that ones that went underneath skirt supports were a little bit narrower than the ones that went over the skirt supports. So take that into account as well. But I'm going to cut 3 for this first one, and we'll probably do 3.5 for the next 2. We're also going to need a waistband. I want my finished waistband to be about an inch wide. You can make them a little bit wider. Look at originals, just kind of see what they would have done. I want a little bit narrower one, so an inch. We're going to fold the waistband over, so I need really a 2-inch waistband and 1/2-inch seam allowances on either end, so it's a 3-inch waistband. That's just easy for me to remember. If you wanted an 1.5-inch waistband, I would cut a 4-inch waistband. Where it needs to be. Now 45 is more than my waist measurement, so I only need to rip one little panel. If your waist measurement is larger than the width of your fabric, you're going to need to cut it a little bit more and piece it. Alright, so those are all the pieces that we need for our first petticoat. So what we're going to start doing now is we're going to put the waistband aside. We don't need this right now. We're going to sew our panels together. You might iron them. I like to iron mine when it's all done, so I don't worry about it. But if it's bothering you and yours is really, folded up, go ahead and iron it. You don't have to pin it. I tend to pin like just a little bit just to make sure everything's going to fit nicely. Pin 2 pieces together. Plain weave cotton should not have a right and a wrong side, so just start pinning. Let's get the third one pinned on, and then we'll sew the other 2 together as well. We're going to make a circle basically. On this last one, we're not going to sew all the way up. We're going to leave a little area so that we can have an opening in the back to actually, put on the petticoat. So decide how far down from the top that you want that placket, and that's going to depend on your waist and hip measurement. So if you have, say, a 30-inch waist, your waistband will be 30 inches. Let's say you had a 50-inch hip. But let's say if your waist is 30 inches and you had 50-inch hips, your hips are 20 inches more than your waist, and to be able to get the petticoat on and also get over your chest or your shoulders, depending on how you put your petticoats on. If you go up underneath, you're going to need to measure your hips. If you go over top, measure your basically the widest part of your body, which will be like your shoulders. So let's say your shoulders are 40 inches and you go over the top when you get dressed. So that means you need 10 inches, a little over 10 inches. You don't want it tight. Let's add about 5 inches to that measurement. So let's say 15 inches. You need extra to get over your shoulders. 15, because we have 2 sides here, we're going to divide it by 2. That's 7.5 inches. So you would measure 7.5 inches down, but remember we have this 1/2 inch here, this is seam allowance, so we're going to go 8 inches down. And we'll have an 8-inch place or part of the skirt that we are not going to sew on the very top. It doesn't matter which is your top or your bottom right now, so just pick one and be good. You had 45-inch shoulders, or the widest part of how you're going to get dressed is 45 inches. 15 inches, add 5 inches for ease, so that's 20 inches. Divide that in half, you need a 10-inch placket. You just want to make sure that it's easy to get the dress on, because you only have a 3 or 4-inch placket, but you have really wide hips or really wide shoulders, you're not going to be able to get the petticoat on. Now that we have the whole thing pinned and prepped, we have a opening placket. So only an opening placket on one of the seams. The rest of your seams don't put an opening placket. But you have an opening placket on one, the rest of them are all pinned. We can go ahead and start sewing. How wide your seam allowance is totally up to you and your fabric. So if you have a fabric that has a really weird selvage, and it has like designs on it or something, you want to make sure you're going to where that doesn't show in the front. I have a selvage that looks totally normal, like you can't tell where the selvage is. So I could do as little as a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We are not going to need to finish this edge at all. The benefits of using the selvage edge, this will not ravel even when it's heavily laundered, so that's why we use the selvage edge. So yes, we're just going to sew down. I usually just do this is going to be a machine sew petticoat, so just a machine foot's length away from the edge, and I sew them all the way down that way. It doesn't matter. Do whatever's feel comfortable for you. Sew all those seams up. Make sure that you leave this open. I'm going to be using my modern machine to sew these petticoats today. I also have various antique ones behind here, but we're going to use the modern one today. Now when you are setting your machine up, you want to have a very small stitch. We like our stitches very nice and big nowadays because they're easier to rip out, but a small stitch is very common in the time period. So anywhere, let's see, what is mine set at? Mine's just whatever it's automatically set at. I think you should do less than 2, I think it's 2 millimeters. I don't know, mine says it at 2. It's, or less, you can do less as well. But yeah, I just do whatever it's naturally set at is what I usually use because I have mine set for a very small stitch naturally. Alright, so here is our lovely petticoat, all stitched together on the sides. We're going to go ahead and hem it. So I have the hem of it on my ironing board. I am just going to kind of, get some of these wrinkles out real quick. I might need water. And just, press it to one side. We like to open seams. Seems like most of the originals I've dealt with had, seams put to one side. Just pick a side. Alright. So what I'm going to do first is go ahead and iron over my 1/2 inch. You can measure it with an actual measuring tape. I like to eyeball things. And when you reach the end and you have the whole circumference sewn over like this, now we're going to fold over the hem again. So I measured out that I wanted a 2-inch hem. So I'm going to measure it 2 inches. You do whatever your math tells you need to do. If you wanted a 3-inch hem, go for a 3-inch hem. If you wanted a 1-inch hem, do a 1-inch hem. That's too much, I can already tell you. Yep, there's a 3-inch hem. There we go. I'm going to iron that down. You might find you want to pin it to kind of keep it in place. And just like the 1/2 inch, we're going to go all the way around doing our 2 inches. And then we'll sew on that edge to give ourselves a nice hem. Alright, now it's time to balance the skirt. So all that means is that generally you need more in the back than you do in the front, because even in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you're wearing a slight bustle at the back. It's not a perfectly round shape like we like to think. There's slight in the back. And you want your skirt to be level at the hem, but if there's more up here than there is over here in the front, you need this part to be longer in the back than in the front. So we took our measurements, we took a front, sides, and back measurement. The longest of that was 34, and so I needed 34 at the back, so I correct everything 34 inches. But I do need it about 1 inch shorter in the front, and so this is, I have it folded in half, and this is the center front. So I'm just going to cut 1 inch, more or less, kind of slowly going up. And there are more precise ways to do this. About 1/2 inch there at the side. I did mark the side. And slowly going up until you just kind of have that. So this is scrap now. And now I have a balanced skirt, so it'll be even all the way around. And now we're going to gather it. So we're going to do hand gathers. We don't want to do this by machine. theirs didn't do gathering threads like we think of it today. So this is going to be done by hand. And I suggest doing it into quarters, because if one breaks, that way you only have to do a fourth of your skirt over. So I would mark the center front, which we already have here. And then we're going to mark the center, or the sides. You can do one gathering thread or two. I like to do one because it's easier and faster. I'm just going to measure how long one of these quarters is and make my thread about maybe 7 or 8 inches longer. Thread my needle, and we're going to put our thread about 1/2 inch from the edge, and just do little gathering threads. They don't have to be necessarily even. I'm going to try to get them fairly even, but you know, not terribly even, and you don't have to do tiny little stitches. This is a gathering thread, so there'll be 4 quarters you'll do. You could do it in half. You could do the whole thing with one thread, but that's a lot of thread, and it'll get very long. It'll probably knot on you. You could do 8s if you want to do 8s. I just find quarters are sufficient. You get a decently long thread where you feel like where you're not feeling like you have to constantly change it. But if it breaks or something on you, then it's not the end of the world. Go all the way around your skirt, and then we're going to talk about the waistband. Now for the width of my waistband, I want my waist measurement plus 1 inch of turn under, and we're also going to need to fold over or overlap the ends to make a button and buttonhole. So I'll add 2 inches for that. So since my waist measurement is 36 inches, I need to add 1 inch for turn under at the ends, so that's 37 inches, and 2 inches for overlap, which is 39 inches. And if you have a particularly wide waistline where your fabric is narrower, you can always piece it by just joining 2 pieces together and then cutting the length that you need. And mark each of those quarters. Now I can play connect dots, basically. Just connect all these pieces. So I'm going to find the center front of my petticoat. And you want to make sure you're doing it right sides together. So you want to make sure you're doing this on the right side of the petticoat. So this is the right side and this is the wrong side of my petticoat. But the waistband doesn't really matter. There is no right or wrong yet. And then we're going to match those pins. And just put a pin there to connect them. I'm going to find this quarter. Match those pins. Find the center back. I'm going to turn this under a little bit. That's why we added that extra inch. Remember to turn that under to make it not a raw edge. Although this is a self edge, so it doesn't really matter on this end. And we're going to match those. We've already turned that seam under because it's where the center back is. So that's a finished edge, and now this is a finished edge. Now we're going to go back because we did it from the center. Now we've got to do the other side. There we go. So now that our waistband is attached, we can start pulling on our gathering threads and kind of help it along. You don't want to break your threads. You want to be kind of gentle with it. And what you're looking for is for this piece, your skirt, to match the waistband. If you get it a little bit too small, just kind of pull it out. It's fine. And once you have the gathers evened out nicely, then you can pin it together to kind of hold it in place. Matching the raw edges. Okay, so there's a quarter of my skirt already done. So now I'm going to do this quarter. And when it's looking good, you're going to pin that quarter as well. And then you go to the other side and do the same thing so that your waistband matches your skirt. Alright, and the petticoat now matches the waistband. You can take these super long strings, cut them off, and tie them so that your gathering doesn't come out while you're sewing. But we're going to sew this waistband to the skirt now. Alright, so after sewing your waistband on by machine, we're going to take that raw edge, turn it 1/2 inch under because we measured 1/2 inch when we made our waistband, and then pin that onto the skirt on the back side, making sure to cover the raw edges of the gathering. Pin it all the way around, and then we'll start sewing. So to sew this, we're going to make a really tiny whip stitch, very close together whip stitch, all the way across the entire length of the petticoat. You're going to stitch basically where the waistband meets the skirt. So right where the gathering thread you did is, and the stitching line that you did by machine, you're going to do that. You're going to sew it right there. After a waistband is sewn on, we're going to sew on a button. You can decide which side you want the button, which side you want the buttonhole. I do very occasionally see original petticoats that have a drawstring, but they are very, very rare. Most often, they will close with a button and buttonhole. So sew on your button, and then you get to cut a buttonhole and stitch that with a buttonhole stitch. And that is the very last step of making your very basic petticoat. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from the video. If you did enjoy it, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more content regarding making mid-century clothing. As always, have a fantastic week, and I will see you back here on Monday.